You know that feeling when you've done everything right. You skipped the pasta. You turned down the bread basket. You made yourself a beautiful, colorful plate of roasted vegetables because you're being good, you're being healthy, you're making the smart choice. And then, maybe an hour later, you feel that familiar wave of fatigue. Your energy crashes. You get that weird mental fog. And if you're someone who tracks their blood sugar, you pull out your glucose meter, and the number staring back at you makes absolutely no sense. 178. After vegetables. After what was supposed to be a model meal. I've gotten dozens of messages describing this exact scenario. They write to me genuinely confused, sometimes frustrated, sometimes even a little scared, because they thought they were doing everything by the book. And here's the thing I always tell them, and it's the thing I want you to understand right from the start of this video. Your blood glucose meter doesn't care about marketing. It only cares about biochemistry. This is not about vegetables being bad. Let me be crystal clear about that. Vegetables are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. They contain vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber, and phytonutrients that are absolutely essential for your health. But here's the nuance that often gets lost in general nutritional advice. Not all vegetables affect your metabolism the same way. Some vegetables, particularly the starchy and naturally sweeter varieties, can cause rapid glucose spikes that are especially significant if you're dealing with insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, or if you're simply trying to optimize your metabolic health. And understanding which ones these are, and more importantly, how to prepare and eat them safely, is going to give you so much more control over how you feel. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment down below and let me know which country you're watching from today. I know we have viewers tuning in from every corner of the globe, and that's something I find genuinely remarkable. Blood sugar dysregulation isn't a Western problem or an American problem. It's a human problem. So whether you're watching from Germany or Ghana, from Brazil or Bangladesh, from Canada or the Philippines, I want to hear from you. Let me see where this community is spread around the world. Now let's quickly cover some essential science, because this is going to reframe how you think about these vegetables. When we talk about complex carbohydrates versus simple sugars, there's often this implication that complex carbs are somehow fundamentally different, that they're slow-releasing, that they're gentle on your blood sugar. And while fiber and food structure do play a role in how quickly carbohydrates are absorbed, here's what you need to understand. From a molecular standpoint, all digestible carbohydrates break down into glucose. The starch in a potato is literally just a long chain of glucose molecules linked together. The moment that starch hits your saliva, enzymes called amylases start snipping those chains apart. By the time that food reaches your small intestine, what was once a complex carbohydrate is now a flood of individual glucose molecules ready to enter your bloodstream. So when someone says a vegetable is starchy, what they're really saying is that it's packed with sugar molecules holding hands. Your body breaks those hands apart very quickly, and suddenly you have sugar in your blood. The key question becomes, how quickly does this happen, and how much sugar are we actually talking about? This is where the glycemic index, or GI, becomes useful. The glycemic index measures how quickly a food raises blood glucose compared to pure glucose, which is set at 100. A high GI food causes a rapid spike. A low GI food causes a more gradual rise. But even more relevant for real-world eating is the glycemic load, which takes into account the actual amount of carbohydrate in a typical serving. Both of these metrics will help us understand why some healthy vegetables might be sabotaging your metabolic goals. And for every single vegetable I'm about to share with you, I'm going to give you a practical, science-backed strategy to optimize how you eat it so you can still enjoy these foods without the metabolic roller coaster. Let's begin our countdown with number 8, and this one is going to surprise a lot of people because it's the darling of the health food world. I'm talking about beets, beautiful, vibrant, ruby red beets. You see them in wellness shots, in fancy salads, in those Instagram-worthy grain bowls. Beets are promoted for their nitric oxide content, their potential blood pressure benefits, and their incredible antioxidant profile. All of that is true. But here's what's often left out of the conversation. Beets are one of the sweetest vegetables in the entire produce aisle. They contain about 8 to 10 grams of sugar per 100 grams, and they have a glycemic index hovering around 64, which puts them in the medium-high category. To put that in perspective, that's similar to the GI of sucrose, which is table sugar. When you juice beets, which is extremely popular, you're removing the fiber, concentrating the sugars and creating a liquid that hits your bloodstream with remarkable speed. A large glass of beet juice can contain the sugar equivalent of 3 to 4 teaspoons of table sugar, with nothing to slow down absorption. Here's your optimization tip for beets. Eat them whole, not juiced. When you eat the actual vegetable, you're getting all that fiber intact, which significantly slows the release of sugars into your bloodstream. Roast them with a generous drizzle of extra virgin olive oil and serve them alongside a protein source like grilled chicken or fish. The fat and protein both delay gastric emptying, meaning the sugars from those beets will enter your bloodstream much more gradually. Also, consider eating beets at the end of your meal rather than as a starter or on their own. Research has shown that consuming vegetables after protein and fat can reduce the glucose spike by up to 40% compared to eating those same vegetables first. Moving up to number 7, we have corn. Now I can already hear some of you saying, wait, corn isn't even a vegetable, it's a grain. And you'd be absolutely right. Botanically and agriculturally, corn is a cereal grain. But in most households and restaurants, corn is served and perceived as a vegetable. It shows up on the side of your plate next to the green beans in the salad. And this misclassification is part of the problem because it leads people to underestimate its metabolic impact. Corn has a glycemic index ranging from 52 to 60, depending on the variety and preparation, but here's where it gets tricky. A single ear of corn contains about 17 grams of digestible carbohydrates. If you're eating corn on the cob at a summer barbecue, you might easily have 2 ears. That's 34 grams of carbohydrates, equivalent to roughly 2.5 slices of bread, entering your system. Add the butter that's melting on top, and you've got a meal that can cause a significant glucose excursion. The fix for corn is all about portion control and context. If you enjoy corn, have half an ear rather than 2 full ears. Even better, opt for the younger, less mature versions like baby corn, which have fewer carbohydrates per serving. When corn is part of your meal, make sure it's accompanied by a substantial serving of protein and some healthy fats. The combination of macronutrients helps moderate the insulin response. Another strategy is to choose frozen corn over canned corn when possible, as some canned varieties have added sugars, and the processing can increase the glycemic response. Coming in at number 6, we have green peas, sweet little peas. They seem so innocent, don't they? They're green, they're round, they go in stir-fries and salads. They're what you add to rice to make it seem more nutritious. But peas are actually a legume, not a typical vegetable, and they carry a significant starch load. A cup of cooked green peas contains about 25 grams of carbohydrates, with a glycemic index around 51. While that GI is moderate, the sheer volume of carbohydrates means the glycemic load of a typical serving is substantial. Many people add peas liberally to dishes thinking they're just adding vegetables, when in reality they're adding a meaningful source of starchy carbohydrates. For peas, the optimization approach is similar to other starchy vegetables, but with an added emphasis on vinegar. Adding an acidic component like apple cider vinegar or lemon juice to your meal has been shown in multiple studies to reduce the glycemic response by as much as 20 to 30%. The acid slows down the enzyme activity that breaks down starches. So if you're having peas in a stir-fry, add a splash of rice vinegar. If they're in a salad, use a lemon-based vinaigrette. Combine this with a moderate portion size, about half a cup rather than a full cup, and you can enjoy peas without the metabolic spike. At number 5, we arrive at butternut squash, the autumn superstar that shows up in soups, risottos, and those beautifully arranged seasonal bowls. Butternut squash has earned a reputation as a healthy comfort food, and it does have legitimate nutritional benefits. It's high in vitamin A, provides vitamin C, contains fiber, and has antioxidant properties. However, it also contains a notable amount of natural sugars and starch. A cup of cooked butternut squash has about 22 grams of carbohydrates and a glycemic index around 51. The issue isn't that butternut squash is inherently problematic. The issue is how it's typically prepared and served. When you roast butternut squash until it's caramelized and tender, you're concentrating those sugars and making them more rapidly accessible. When you blend it into a creamy soup with nothing else to slow absorption, you're essentially drinking starchy sugar water. The hack for butternut squash is to embrace the cube over the puree. When you eat butternut squash in chunky pieces rather than blended, the physical structure of the food slows down digestion. Leave the skin on when possible, as it contains additional fiber. Roast the cubes with plenty of olive oil and pair them with a protein source on the same plate. If you're making butternut squash soup, add a can of cannellini beans to the blend. The beans add protein and fiber, which will significantly blunt the glucose response while also making the soup more filling. Number 4 on our list is one that really catches people off guard, and that's carrots, specifically cooked carrots. Raw carrots are actually quite low on the glycemic index, coming in around 35, because the cellular structure is intact and requires significant work to break down. But here's where things get interesting. When you cook carrots, especially when you boil them until they're soft or puree them into a soup, you're breaking down those cell walls and making the starches and sugars much more accessible. The glycemic index of cooked carrots can climb to 47 or higher, and in some preparations, particularly pureeing or juicing, it can go even higher. Carrot juice, often marketed as a health elixir, has a glycemic index around 43 but comes with a very high glycemic load because you're consuming the sugars from multiple carrots in a single glass with no fiber to slow things down. The solution for carrots is simple: keep them crunchy. If you enjoy cooked carrots, steam or roast them until they're just tender but still have some bite. Al dente carrots have a lower glycemic response than carrots that are cooked until soft. Better yet, eat them raw with hummus. The combination of the intact cellular structure, the fiber, and the fat and protein from the hummus creates an ideal metabolic scenario. Avoid carrot juice unless you're immediately pairing it with a meal that contains fat and protein, and even then, keep the portion small. We're now getting into the top 3, and at number 3, we have pumpkin. This one surprises people because pumpkin is often lumped in with other winter squashes and assumed to have a similar moderate impact. But pumpkin actually has a glycemic index of approximately 75, which is notably higher than butternut squash and comparable to white bread. 100 grams of cooked pumpkin contains about 7 grams of carbohydrates, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that most pumpkin dishes use considerably more than 100 grams. When you're eating pumpkin soup, pumpkin pie, pumpkin curry, or any dish where pumpkin is the star, you're likely consuming several hundred grams in a single serving. The sugars in pumpkin are highly accessible once cooked, and the relatively low fiber content doesn't do much to slow things down. Your optimization strategy for pumpkin focuses on fat and fiber pairing. Always cook pumpkin with a generous amount of healthy fats like olive oil, coconut oil, or butter if you tolerate dairy. Fat dramatically slows gastric emptying. Add a source of fiber to any pumpkin dish, whether that's leafy greens on the side or seeds sprinkled on top. Pumpkin seeds, interestingly, are an excellent choice because they add protein, fat, and fiber while enhancing the dish thematically. Consider treating pumpkin as a condiment rather than a main component, using a smaller portion as an accent to a meal rather than making it the centerpiece. At number 2, we encounter the vegetable that has been marketed as the healthy alternative to its problematic cousin for decades. I'm talking about sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes have achieved almost legendary status in the health food world. They're the go-to substitution for regular potatoes in countless diet plans. They're praised for their beta-carotene, their fiber, their vitamin content. And yes, they do have nutritional benefits. But here's what the marketing often fails to mention. The glycemic index of sweet potatoes varies wildly depending on how they're prepared, ranging from a low of around 44 to a high of 94. When you bake a sweet potato until it's soft and caramelized, you're looking at a GI that's not dramatically different from a white potato. A medium-baked sweet potato contains about 26 grams of carbohydrates, which is substantial. The perception that you can eat unlimited sweet potato fries, because they're the healthy version of fries, has led many people astray. The key to sweet potatoes is to cook them gently and pair them wisely. Boiling sweet potatoes rather than baking them results in a significantly lower glycemic response. Eating sweet potatoes with the skin on adds fiber. Combining them with a fat source like butter or olive oil and a protein source slows absorption. Perhaps most importantly, don't fall for the portion trap. A reasonable serving of sweet potato is about half a cup, not an entire large potato. Consider using sweet potato as a component of a meal rather than the base of the meal. A few cubes of roasted sweet potato in a salad is metabolically very different from a loaded sweet potato as your entire dinner. And now we arrive at number 1, the vegetable that sits at the top of this list, the starch heavyweight that most metabolic health experts advise their clients to approach with caution. The white potato. I know. In some ways, this isn't a surprise. Potatoes have been demonized by low-carb communities for years. But in other ways, the full picture is rarely explained, and more importantly, the science of how to rehabilitate this vegetable is often left out entirely. White potatoes, depending on the variety and preparation method, have a glycemic index ranging from 78 to over 110. That's higher than pure glucose in some cases. A medium-baked potato contains about 37 grams of carbohydrates. When you eat a hot baked potato, the starch granules are swollen with water, and the starch molecules are in an easily digestible form called gelatinized starch. Your amylase enzymes attack this with remarkable efficiency, and glucose floods into your bloodstream rapidly. Mashed potatoes, because they're mechanically broken down, are even worse. French fries, despite being cooked in fat, still create significant glucose spikes. But here's where this gets genuinely fascinating, and this is the section I've been waiting to share with you because it contains some of the most actionable science in this entire video. There's a phenomenon called resistant starch formation, or more technically, retrogradation. When you cook a potato and then cool it, something remarkable happens at the molecular level. The starch molecules begin to realign and crystallize into a tighter, more compact structure. This cooled starch is called retrograded starch, or resistant starch, because it literally resists digestion. Your enzymes can't break it down as efficiently. It passes through your small intestine partially undigested and actually feeds beneficial bacteria in your large intestine, functioning more like fiber than like a rapidly absorbed carbohydrate. Studies have shown that cooling cooked potatoes for 12 to 24 hours can reduce their glycemic impact by approximately 20 to 40%. And here's the part that really surprised researchers. Reheating the potato doesn't undo this effect. When you reheat a cooled potato, some additional starch does become digestible again, but a significant portion of the resistant starch remains resistant. This means that leftover potato salad, served cold with olive oil and vinegar, has a dramatically different metabolic impact than a freshly baked hot potato. Potato dishes that are cooked, cooled, and then gently reheated have a lower glycemic response than potatoes served immediately after cooking. The same principle applies to rice and pasta, by the way, which is why cold rice sushi and day-old pasta salad are metabolically different from their freshly cooked counterparts. Your optimization protocol for potatoes is therefore multi-layered. First, embrace the cook-cool reheat method. Make your roasted potatoes the day before. Let them cool completely in the refrigerator. Reheat them gently before serving. Second, add acid. Vinegar, lemon juice, or any acidic component with your potato dish reduces the glycemic response. Third, pair with fat and protein. The classic combination of a potato with sour cream and a piece of steak isn't just delicious. It's actually metabolically smarter than eating a plain potato alone because the fat and protein slow down digestion. Fourth, consider the variety. Waxy potatoes like new potatoes have slightly more resistant starch than fluffy, starchy varieties. Fifth, keep the skin on, as it adds fiber and slows digestion. So where does all of this leave us? Have I just told you to never eat vegetables? Absolutely not. What I've tried to do in this video is give you the nuanced information that allows you to make informed choices. Vegetables remain incredibly important for health. The fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients, the prebiotic compounds, all of these are essential for a well-functioning body. But understanding the glycemic reality of certain vegetables, particularly if you're managing blood sugar, allows you to eat these foods strategically rather than avoiding them entirely or consuming them naively. Let me leave you with 3 golden rules that summarize everything we've discussed. The first rule is sequencing. The order in which you eat foods matters significantly. Research by Dr. Alpana Shukla and colleagues at Weill Cornell Medical College has shown that eating protein and fat before carbohydrates can reduce post-meal glucose spikes by as much as 40%. So at any meal, eat your protein first, your non-starchy vegetables second, and your starchy vegetables last. This simple change, which costs nothing and requires no special foods, can dramatically change your metabolic response. The second rule is pairing. Never eat a starchy or sugary vegetable alone. Always combine it with fat, protein, or both. Add olive oil to your roasted vegetables. Eat your corn alongside your steak. Top your butternut squash soup with pumpkin seeds. The presence of fat and protein slows gastric emptying and moderates the insulin response, transforming what would be a sharp glucose spike into a gentler glucose curve. The third rule is preparation. How you cook matters. Cooking methods that preserve structure, like roasting until just tender or steaming until al dente, result in lower glycemic responses than methods that break down structure, like boiling until soft or pureeing into soups. Embrace the cook-cool-reheat cycle for starchy vegetables when possible. Use acid liberally, whether that's a splash of vinegar in your cooking or a lemon-based dressing on your salad. These preparation choices are invisible at the table, but profound in your bloodstream. If you found this video valuable, if it's given you a new framework for thinking about vegetables and blood sugar, then I would genuinely appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when we release new content. My goal with this channel has never been to scare you or to tell you that everything is dangerous. My goal is to empower you with knowledge, to give you the biochemical understanding that allows you to make choices that serve your unique body and your unique goals. Knowledge isn't about restriction, it's about freedom. When you understand how food actually works in your body, you're no longer guessing. You're no longer anxious about every meal. You're in control. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you to everyone who dropped a comment sharing what country you're watching from. This community is global, it's growing, and it's one of the most thoughtful groups of people I've ever had the privilege to communicate with. Take care of yourselves, make informed choices, and I'll see you in the next video.